Hey everybody, welcome back. In my last video, I talked about how queer folks, neurodivergent individuals, people of color, and many, many more demographic groups are leaving the construction industry and in record-breaking numbers. Today, I want to carry on that conversation. This is part 2 of this 3-part series we are going on. But instead of talking about all of the stuff we did last time, I want to focus on some of the things that we can do to improve it. There are so many different bits of criteria that we often don't consider when it comes to both the trades, electrical engineering, other industries that impact the construction industry at large. So let's get into it. So you see, something that has been on my mind is that electricians train for 4 years. They often work their tail to the bone, go to school after hours, usually 2 times a week. This is particularly fascinating because this is directly correlated with the state of Utah. So not only are you working a lot, right, at least 40 hours a week, sometimes even 50 hours a week, then on top of that, you are expected to go to school twice a week. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but the reason why I mentioned that twice is think about your college experience. If you went to college, you know that you spent probably 15, maybe 16 hours of classroom time a week, and then the rule is, 1 hour of homework per hour of classroom time. You had a 24-hour weekly part-time job on that. You're well over 56 hours a week. It gets exhausting. And not to mention, you look at your counterparts, they're breaking their backs, and then on top of that, they're asked to do intellectual work. A lot of times, electricians and other people in the trades look down on people who sit at a desk or look down on people who have a degree because they don't think it's real hard work. Well, let me tell you something. Being able to focus on any mentally demanding task can be very draining. If you're an electrician, for example, and your job is to quality control an electrical panel, you're given a schematic, and then on top of that, you have to tie it into a lighting control panel or some other form of automated PCB, you now are going from 120 volts or 277 volts to 12 volts or less. This is where it gets complicated. You really have to understand all of these different variables, and it gets convoluted really quickly. So electricians out there, please be respectful of those who go to school because this is no small task, and we're not talking about something incredibly minute or simple. These are complex issues that have plagued many industries and many industries that have things in common. I think back to my apprenticeship program, and class started at 6 p.m. and went all the way till 10. That was 2 nights a week. You could choose Monday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Yeah, it was Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. There we go. Sorry. Weeks, I guess, blur together. All of these things are so complicated. And why are we focusing on all of these complicated issues? Let's compare that to the experience of an engineering student, right? They have a 24-hour job. I already had mentioned that, 15 hours, and that's middle. Sometimes it's even more. If you're taking certain classes and you do not want to take summer semester courses, you could expect anywhere from 17 to 20 hours a week of classroom time. That's a lot. And then you add homework on top of that. And if you're taking, let's say, 5 classes a week, that's a lot. And that starts to eat at you. You're stressed all the time. You're anxious about your assignments. You're anxious about how you're going to pass your next exam. All of these things are so correlated with each other, and it gets harder and harder as you progress to your 4th year. And once you get that beautiful bachelor's degree, oftentimes you're burdened by student loans, and on top of that, you have to do internships just to even qualify for a full-time job, maybe making $75,000 a year. When it comes to an electrician, on the other hand, it gets really bad. You have all of this vigorous work, your body's sore, you're tense, you're trying to gain that upward mobility, but a lot of people look at the younger generations as lazy, entitled, and they are generally just looked down on, especially by the boomers, sometimes the Xers. It really depends on who you talk to. There was a guy I used to work with, and he used to say, "Oh, well, I've been doing this 30 years, so you should listen to me." You can be an industry professional and still be an idiot. How many times let's talk to our homeowners. So if you are a homeowner and you hire a framer and he's like, "I've got 40 years experience," and they're, let's say, 61, and you look at someone who's 30 and they say, "I've got 5 years experience, but I know a lot of the new tools and tricks," who are you going to hire? Are you going to hire someone that's younger, more capable, most likely able to get the job done faster, or are you going to hire someone with that experience? That's a personal call, and it gets very interesting the further you go down this rabbit hole, because that's not the only issue we face when it comes to tradesmen. I think something that we often take for granted is how easy we actually have it. We have so many modern technologies out there that can assist us in our jobs, and the hard part with electrical work and the hard part with engineering is, a lot of electrical engineers, if they specialize, to make that extra $20,000 a year to be at 100K, they're going to be pigeonholed. And a lot of these engineers are at risk of losing their jobs because of artificial intelligence and automation. On the flip side of that, you have electricians, right? It's not the exact same issue, but it's similar enough that we should be looking at ways to reinvent how we do this. We have dwindling numbers for trade professionals. That's problem one. Problem two is, with that happening, we now have robots that can float a concrete floor. For those non-trade folk out there, what it means to float a floor means that they pour the concrete in and they come in with trowels. Well, a robot can go across the floor, leaving no prints, leaving it perfectly silky smooth with a gloss finish. That is powerful, because you know what that showcases? One, there's not enough people entering the trade. Two, what does that showcase? That also showcases a vulnerability for replacement. I truly believe that hands-on experience are what make these industries what they are. But engineers and electricians have a lot more in common than people think. And I think we need to take a hard look at this and reinvent the way we actually engage with these young people who are looking for an education. Because honestly, either way you cut it, both sides are getting tossed to the side because of automation and other things. Who's to say that in 4 years or less, we don't have robots that can pull wire? We have tuggers. It's not that hard to believe. It doesn't really take that much of an engineering or design gap in order to make something more efficient and easier for robots or other machines to do. So let's talk about this. We can talk about, so many different factors. But the one thing I want to talk about that's really crucial to all of this is education. 4 years and a degree, and somewhere between 55 and 60 hours a week, if not more, including a part-time job, in order to end up with a piece of paper. 52 to 55 hours a week in order to maintain your electrical license. And on top of that, continuing education. I don't deny that continuing education has its place, but when we look at it, it's not really a good solution either, because we really have a lot of conflicts when it comes to that. Because one, states get to adjudicate which portions of code they adopt every 3 years. And on top of that, that takes 18 months for most legislators to come to a determination whether they're going to adopt the whole code or only a portion of it. Next, you have electrical engineers. They kind of have the better end of this because they're able to get their license, they get a certificate, and after they're done, that is transferable nationwide. And that's before specialization and the requirement of other, certifications or other courses they need to take in order to go into whatever field they choose. Now, I got to thinking about this. Why is it that our engineering colleagues get the better end of this? Is it because they spend more on schooling? Is it because they have a better brain on their shoulders? Is it because they're better liked? I'm going to go ahead and say it's probably a combination of all of these factors, because the trades often get dogged on all the time, right? If you look at engineers as a whole, that is the degree that people usually look at as the gold standard. And where that is fine and dandy, I think that's great because it takes a lot of time, but electricians never get that same treatment. Something seems off about that. We just compared the education system, and if both require that much work, that much attention to detail, you would think that the wages would be closer, one. And two, you would also think that everything would be moving along a lot easier, but it's not. So how do we fix this? One, we need to adopt some of these practices that our engineering colleagues adopted a long time ago. Our systems for teaching and learning are archaic, and they're built around models that don't really fit our modern world. With automation comes the chance to learn something new. With the ability to use robots and other various technologies to help us achieve a higher safety standard, that is something that we should also look into. Next, we should also embrace all diverse backgrounds. For example, if you had a female engineering student who had a really, really great experience during college, shouldn't you give her a chance over someone who is an industry veteran? I would say yes, because that collegiate level experience can be the difference between innovating and changing the way we do things versus something that ends up plaguing the industry for years to come, and then we wonder why we're laying people off because their jobs are getting replaced. The solution, I believe, isn't going out there and restricting people on what they can and can't do. My belief is that we need to adapt and move on. So what am I proposing here? I've been alluding to this for a while. I think it's high time that we focus on a structure that is simple. But if the codebook covers everything from mobile homes to industrial sewer plants, carnivals, to marinas to solar farms, electric car chargers, to wind farms, I think we really need to focus on all of these nuanced details. We already have something in our hands that is one size fits all. So what do? We could get rid of the education. I don't think that's the right move. We could encourage engineers to get more field experience. I think that's a great idea because a lot of engineers do not have that construction background, right? They go to classroom and they spend all this time. I feel like they should spend at least a couple hours on a construction site so they can see what they are designing and what they are asking these installers to do. 2, electricians often don't get the credit they deserve because they have that overlap with engineers, right? They do those code calculations for sizing of electrical equipment and services. That's kind of a big deal. And a lot of times people do not take that into account. So how do we merge the two? I've got it. I'm not saying this is the easiest path forward, but I do think that we have a huge opportunity to 1, shorten the program by a year. 2, ask for hands-on training 1-to-1. That's pretty explanatory, right? Self-explanatory. But one thing that is lacking here is apprenticeships of old used to require individual one-on-one training with code teaching. No calculations were taught except on the projects that demanded it. 2, the next thing that happened was that these apprentices not only got taught by these individual journeymen or master electricians, the next thing that happened was that a lot of these people had an opportunity to be critiqued and also tested on their knowledge by local officials and inspectors. What changed? 1, growth. It was explosive. We had so much growth so fast, there was no way to maintain that model. So in order to maintain a standard of electrical training, they required states to take matters into their own hands and issue individual licenses. Well, the issue with that is in our current day and age, the cost of living is so dramatic from state to state. If you feel like you cannot get ahead, you shouldn't have to go to another state to take another test in order to pass their state requirements in order to do electrical work. We already have a baseline. That codebook is not an instruction manual. It is the bare minimum requirements for an installation and for any safeguarding of persons. That is what it says in the beginning of the book. I think that we are missing a huge opportunity here because all of this can be rectified by allowing a nationwide license to take care of this. CDLs, for example, are nationwide recognized. You do have to have certain permissions and certain permits when driving in certain cities, but that by and large is an easy oversight that we can look at because, for example, in the state of New York, they do not require a state license. You're right, they do require licenses. Individual cities, local neighborhoods in some cases, in talks of New York City, sometimes even boroughs require individual certificates, licenses, or permits before you can perform any electrical work. So for example, if you got your license for Manhattan, that inherent license is not necessarily transferable to Brooklyn. I know some people down in the comments might correct me on this, but from what I understand, that is a pretty big problem and it pigeonholes people. Unless you're a part of an electrical union, it's really, really hard to get around those different license requirements. Unions allow people to transfer from one state to another state and not have to necessarily transfer your license. Why? Because you're an apprentice, right? If you go to, let's say, California. Let's say I have my Utah license and I go to California. I would be an apprentice in that state until I got my journeyman license for the state of California. However, if I'm a part of any union electrical shop, that local, what we call them, can go forward and say, okay, well, you had your license in Utah, so we're going to go ahead and recognize that as your journeyman license for the state of California. Now, once you move there permanently, then at that point, the state would probably require you to get a journeyman license just so that way you can have that state license. This is where it gets really interesting because we already have these groundworks that really showcase how we can fix this. I don't believe that we are looking at many issues or complex issues that can't be resolved. I believe they can. And going to a 3-year program and going to something of yesteryear will allow us to be able to understand the needs of our young apprentices. Because, telling people to put up and shut up isn't a solution. Other states have different ways of doing things, and sometimes it works out a lot better for those apprentices in those other states. But in other cases, it ends up burning them. And burning them out or rubbing them the wrong way, they might stay in the trade, but at that point, they're just going to do the bare minimum. Don't we want our best and don't we want the ability to excel? Because frankly, at this point in our country and just the way we have evolved from a Puritan settlement and gotten past the age of English rule, somehow we have forgotten what it means to be brotherly, what it means to be neighborly. We've forgotten what it means to be able to overcome challenges that lead us to a brighter future. I know that this was a lot of information to think about, but if we can fix these issues with simple things, reducing the time in a classroom, reducing the length of the educational courses, combining that with the fact that engineering degrees could be a beneficial leap forward for apprentices. Imagine doing away with the license as a whole and requiring each electrician to be an associate of electrical engineering. One that would give you so much more upward mobility, increased intelligence, and not to mention, if you're already requiring classroom time, that also gives you an ability to go far beyond what your typical engineer gets. And not to mention, that also could provide an increased wage for our engineering friends. This all could be a win-win. Higher wages, shorter classroom time, and a balanced system that allows oversight from state to state, similar to that of a CDL. It's not a terrible idea. I know a lot of people are going to say things like, yo, that's not going to work because you're going to push people out of the industry. Well, we already do that with our classroom time. I can't tell you how crazy it is to go into a classroom. It doesn't matter if it's for an apprenticeship or college, but usually my first classes, because I've done both college and the apprenticeship, usually one of these classes, you'll have at least one or two teachers that'll tell you half of you will not make it through the program and half of you will not end up with a journeyman license. That needs to change. If we need people in these fields, in these industries, we need ways to make this inviting for people. We need to make this a place where people want to be. Pushing people out just because they think differently, act differently, look different than you isn't a healthy way of establishing a balanced work environment. And furthermore, I think we are really pushing out our youngest and our brightest. The best is yet to come. There are so many opportunities out there for electricians, engineers. The country is a boom right now. Even with all of these conflicts in regards to tariffs and the current administration, we have so many opportunities to take our own life into our own hands. We have the ability to take control of this. The trades built this country, but without change, they won't build its future. The hard part with all of this is that we need a system that respects skill and rewards mentorship. We don't need handouts. We don't need shortcuts. We need real solutions worthy of real electrical work, real mentorship, and real creation and passion. This will help us build a more sustainable and strong future, not just for workers, but for all Americans who seek a higher standard and a better way of living. So let's use this to our advantage. Let's embrace change. Let's embrace the future. And this leads us to what comes next. And until next time, this has been my coffee corner, and I'll catch you on the next one.